The MOLUS G300 from ZHIYUN is the most compact and lightest 300-watt LED I've ever seen. It's obvious that portability is the key selling point in this light. This made me think of all the travel and outdoor shoots this light would be perfect for. But I was surprised to find that while its compact design promised extreme portability, its features didn't quite live up to that promise. In this episode, I'll deep dive into the G300, I'll test all its great features including the max mode that boosts its power from 300 to 500 watts. I'll also share all the right and wrong choices they made, which left me struggling to understand why ZHIYUN made such an incredibly small light with so much potential, but didn't take full advantage of its portability, stopping it short from becoming one of the greatest compact lights I've ever seen. Quick disclaimer, ZHIYUN sent me this light for review, but as always, I'm not here for the hype. I'm here to share my unfiltered and unbiased opinion about it from a DP point of view, and make sure you get all the information you need before you decide whether this light is good for you or not. Let's dive in. Lately, we've seen a massive surge in rigging brands expanding into video LEDs that it became really hard to stand out in such saturated market. So ZHIYUN decided to pioneer the super compact high-powered lights innovation with their MOLUS range. They had such revolutionary designs that clearly inspired other brands to copy and compete in the lower power range. But none of them managed to match the high power of the super compact G300 yet. And so far, the G300 is the most compact bicolor 300 watts light in the market. It's so compact that it's third the size of most of its famous 300 watt competitors and 40% lighter than the lightest one. Even the compact form factor of the super fancy Hobelite Pro 300 is more than double its weight. Just for reference, the G300 is only half a pound heavier than the new Aperture 80C, and that's an 80-watt light, not 300. The G300 is so portable that, when packed, this nan-light 300-watt case is bigger than not just one, but two G300 carry cases. I also managed to find this other twin case that's still smaller than the nan-light, yet it carries two lights, making it perfect for traveling and super convenient to store in tight places. But there's a lot more to a light than just size and portability, so let's break things down. Starting with body and design. The light is made of the head and the controller. The head is made of a solid semi-translucent plastic composite with some metal parts. It doesn't feel too plasticky, but it doesn't feel super solid either. I actually love the modern design and its fine details. I gotta admit, this is one of the better looking light fixtures I've seen. I love how it has a built-in umbrella mount, and how the joint is strong enough to support a big softbox without any counterbalance. But I didn't like how the tilt adapter is fixed to the head. I wish you could detach it so it would fit in an even smaller carry case. Talking about carry cases, this light doesn't come with one unfortunately. It only comes with its cardboard box that's obviously not durable for long-term use. Not to mention, it won't look very professional if you show up with it on set. That's first thing that didn't make much sense to me. A super portable light that came without a portability solution. ZHIYUN told me they're already working on a carry case that should come out soon. But I guess we all agree that we shouldn't pay extra for a carry case for a $600 light. But the good news is that I managed to find these two options you already saw. The first is a super compact case that perfectly fits one light, and this other one that can carry two lights. I'll leave the links for the cases in the description if you want to check them out. Going back to the light head, the backside has an open design exposing the big fan with all the heat sinks around it. We have air vents on each side to help with the airflow. The fan kicks in around the 5 minutes mark at half power in room temperature. Fan noise is relatively low if you stay within the 50% average, but it gets louder seconds after you get it to 100%. It's relatively louder than other bigger 300-watt lights, so just make sure to test noise levels before recording sound in quiet locations or in tight spaces. Also, unlike other high-end lights, the fan has a mind of its own. There's no way of controlling its speed or behavior. Its adaptive behavior makes it turn on, speed up, or slow down at its own will. I wish we had some basic fan control, even if that means having a quiet fan at the expense of lower power draw. It's always better to have a consistent fan noise that can easily be removed in post, than have a fan noise that keeps on fluctuating up and down unpredictably throughout the shoot. The head also has a top handle with rubber padding, making it easier to carry or adjust its tilt. We also have a universal Bowens mount, and I also like how the LED chip has a safety glass to protect it from any accidents. The G300 is not weatherproof or even water resistant, which again contradicts the whole purpose of a high-powered portable light. To me, portability is not only convenience in traveling, but mostly about outdoor shoots. So if the light doesn't have any level of weather resistance, then this light will be stuck indoors. And in that case, its super compact size won't really matter much in an indoor setting. Now let's check the controller. It's just a bit taller than the light head and looks pretty similar to it, with the same fan design and air vents on the sides. But the fan in this one is almost quiet. The controller is pretty small compared to other 300-watt lights. On top we have a USB-C for firmware update, but you'll never use it since it's much easier to update through the app. You'll also find the microphones on both sides that lets the light sync to music you're playing. It's a fun feature to have if you want to throw a rap party with your crew after the shoot. The control cable comes out from the top, but unlike the light head where you can detach the cable, this one is fixed to the controller. I wish it was detachable on both ends, not just to have the option of connecting longer cables if needed, but also to make it much more compact and practical to pack without having the cable sticking out like that. But the good thing is that this cable has a total of 7.5 meters of length that's split into the 3 meters from the controller to the head and the 4.5 meters power cable. That's a decent length for rigging your light in high positions or on boom stands, for example, while still having the controller handy. As for mounting options, we only have a nylon strap to hang on your light stands. That's another big drawback. Just try to move your light stand and you'll see how clunky this solution is. The controller will just keep on bumping into the stand every time you move. I mean, why not at least have a screw mount in the back here? Instead, we only have these rubber bumpers that are only useful for a tabletop setting to keep the controller from sliding. But that's not a common scenario for it to be the only other option we have. We've all seen straps in much bigger and heavier controllers, but that didn't stop them from having a V-mount solution and a clamp to firmly secure them to the light stand. So for a compact light like the G300, with such impressive design and thermal innovations, why stop short with such a flimsy mounting solution? It just doesn't make sense. Moving on to the two control dials. The dials are flush with the controller's profile, which makes it easier to pack tightly in a case. The other thing I noticed is how the controller's display is one of the smallest displays I've ever seen in any light. That's another bad decision from ZHIYUN. Just look at the NAN light. It's more than 4 times the size of the G300. Even the tiny aperture 60X has a much bigger display, and that's a 60-watt light, not 300. You can see how it's much easier to read the 60X from far away without squinting, while the G300 is barely visible. Honestly, the controller has more than enough space to extend the screen to up to 6 times its size. If only we moved the power switch to the top to replace the USB-C port that we'll probably never use. Let's jump to the controls and menus. We have the 2 multifunctional dials and the mobile app. We have one dial for power and the other for color temperature. I wish they had a simple color coding to easily differentiate between them in the dark or from a distance, especially that the dial's labels are very small and hard to read. They're multifunctional because you'll get more controls if you short press each of them to cycle through temperatures and power presets, or long press to access the settings and effects menus. If you long press both together, you'll activate the 500 watts max mode. More on that later since I made some interesting discoveries about it. I personally find such multifunctionality unnecessarily clunky and unintuitive. I understand this keeps the controller size small by removing all dedicated buttons, but all these short and long press button combinations are not the most intuitive. I honestly don't want to memorize any of this before jumping on set. Call me old school, but I prefer having the good old dedicated buttons like we always had. They just make everybody's life easier. That's why I find the app a lot more practical to use. But the weird quirk I found is the absence of lighting effects control in the app. So I'm afraid you're stuck adjusting all 14 effects on the controller's tiny screen. Now let's check the photometrics. Let me give you a small nerd alert here since things will get a bit technical. I'll try to simplify everything as much as possible, so stick around and I'll share some pretty interesting facts about this light that might also help you better understand lights in general. Let's first talk about the 500 watts elephant in the room, since this is the second main highlight after the compact size. I find it to be a pretty awesome feature to have, but it came with a couple of drawbacks that I didn't know till I actually tried it myself. In case you didn't know, the max mode boosts the light's power draw from 300 to 500 watts. Think of it as a turbo mode for your light. But before we dive into it, let's first agree on a common misconception about all lights and what their wattage really means. So when we say 300 or 500 watts, that's the power input, not the power output. This 500 watts, for example, goes in to give us the output, which we usually measure in lux or lumens. And of course, the higher the final illuminance number is, the more efficient this light would be. I'm saying this because I've seen many trusted sources mixing things and define watts as outputs. Hold that thought, and I'll tell you why this is important in a minute. Now back to the max mode. Before I share its drawbacks, let me remind you how it's rare to find any brand having the courage to implement such feature in their lights. I think ZHIYUN is mastering heat dissipation technology to the level that they're confident in pushing their lights to their limits to get you more out of them. And the G300 could have easily become a 500 watt light if it wasn't for the following drawbacks. First, this peak output is limited to 4300 Kelvin. You'll notice how your Kelvin setting will automatically switch to 4300 once you turn on max mode. That's basically because both warm and cool LED chips will fire at full power at the same time, resulting in that 4300 Kelvin. But you'll notice that you can still change the color temperature while still in max. But this will gradually lower the light's intensity the further you move away from 4300, yet still keep it slightly above what you'd get from the normal mode. Let's compare intensities between both normal and max mode to better understand what I mean. You can see the difference between both modes across all color temperatures, and how 4300 in max mode is the brightest of them all. You'll also see how things dim down the closer you get to 2700 and 6500. And of course in normal mode everything is less bright, but what I didn't expect is how inconsistent intensities are across all CCTs. That's not ideal of course, since you wouldn't want your light to change its intensity every time you change the color temperature. So at its peak, max mode will give you a maximum of 30% increase in brightness over normal mode. So when they said 60% on their website, what they really meant was 60% power draw. And that's why I said earlier we shouldn't measure lights using watts, but rather focus on the lux output. But is this boost in brightness good enough for a typical 500 watt light? I compared it against the small rig 450, which draws 10% less power than the 500 watts from max mode, and I found out that it's actually 6% brighter. That means the RC is more efficient. In other words, the output from ZHIYUN's 500 watts max power would be equal to small rig's 420 watts setting. Moving on to color accuracy. The next two metrics I'm about to share with you are the two least covered metrics in almost all light reviews I've seen, despite being some of the most important metrics when evaluating any light. And I bet you haven't even heard of the first one, and that's color temperature offset. What you probably didn't know is that every colored light on the market will almost never accurately give you the color temperature you set it to. In the case of the G300, our range starts from 2700 to 6500. So when you set it to 6500 Kelvin, for example, what you really get is around 6200 Kelvin instead. This 300 Kelvin difference is the temperature offset I was telling you about. And the discrepancy between what you set it to and what you really get will vary between color temperatures and from one light to another. And of course, the lower this offset number is, the more accurate the light would be. So I measured the actual temperatures from these Kelvin settings, and I got good results overall. We have marginal positive offsetting at 3200 and below, and the shift gradually increases and dips into the negative the closer we get to 6500, the least accurate setting obviously. So this chart also confirms two things. First, 3200 is the most accurate color temperature in this light. Also, it confirms that the actual temperature range averages between 2700 to 6200, not 65 as advertised. Next up in color accuracy, we have the Spectral Similarity Index. It's the proper scale you should use to measure color accuracy for filmmaking. I bet you're wondering, why not CRI or TLCI? Referencing them to measure light quality as a DP is one of the biggest and most common mistakes almost everyone is making, unfortunately. I've covered this topic in details in this episode. I invite you to check it out if you're interested to better understand the difference between these metrics. I'll leave the link above here and in the description below. In a nutshell, SSI primarily measures how close the light's 3200 Kelvin is to a standard tungsten bulb, as well as how close the 5500 is to natural sunlight. Then it can theoretically calculate the accuracy of all other temperatures in between. All you should care about, though, is how close the SSI score is to 100. The closer it is, the better the light's color accuracy would be. So these are the results I got. As a rule of thumb, and based on today's standards, anything above 80 is considered great, and anything below 70 is just bad. So the G300 is swinging somewhere in between. On one hand, 2700 has a pretty high score of 87, while on the other hand, 6500's score is 71, the lowest acceptable range barely touching the bad range. Also, this graph can tell us two things. First, if you're really looking for color accuracy and fidelity, then try and plan your shoot between 2700 and 3200. Second, try to avoid shooting anywhere close to 6500. Last point is price and value. Compared to other popular 300-watt bicolors, at $600, the G300 is more affordable than the higher-end lights from Aperture and Nanlite. These ones are more focused on pro-level customizations with extra features and controls. On the other hand, the G300 is more expensive than the entry-level models like these ones from Godox and Nanlite, yet it shares almost the same level of basic features, while being a lot more compact than all these lights. So it depends on what you need. Is it pro features, or low budget, or small size? Let's now summarize everything with a rapid-fire round of all the pros, cons, and all the quirks in between. And let me tell you why such a great light confused me so much. Starting with the pros, at 3.5 pounds, the MOLUS G300 is by far the lightest and most compact 300-watt light in the market. It has a standard Bowens mount and a strong tilt adapter that can carry even heavier softboxes despite the small size. It has a built-in umbrella mount and a top handle for adjusting its tilt. The light connects with a long 10-foot cable to an equally small controller. It has a high color accuracy at 2700 Kelvin and a unique 500-watt max mode that boosts its brightness by 30%, which leads me to its cons. The max mode's fan noise is relatively loud, and its high output is limited to 4300 Kelvin. Light accuracy is not good close to 6500 Kelvin, which in reality is 6200. The tilt adapter is fixed to the head. I wish it was detachable for easier packing. The cable is also fixed to the controller, again making it very unpractical to pack. The controller has the smallest display I've seen in any light, making it hard to read from a distance. We don't have dedicated buttons for menu and effects, forcing you to learn all the different combinations of long and short presses on the dials. The controller also has a flimsy strap to hang it on your light stand, instead of the standard V-lock clamp that are way more stable. As for the quirks, that just didn't make much sense to me. The MOLUS G300 is the most compact 300 watts light in the market. It's so small that it's much easier to carry, but funny enough, it doesn't come with a carry case. It's so powerful for such a small size, which would be perfect for outdoor shoots when we don't have access to wall power, but it doesn't have battery power option to operate it outdoors. So maybe I'll carry one of these big battery packs that come with power sockets to power it. But you gotta be careful, the light is not weatherproof, and the body has so many air vents all around it that could easily let dust and moisture in, so shoot outdoors at your own risk. So if it's not made for outdoors, how about studio shoots? But such small size won't really matter in an indoor setting, unless I hook multiple heads to a truss to make use of its super lightweight, and control all the lights from a single DMX control box. But it doesn't have DMX control, so that won't work either. That's where I was confused. So if it's not meant for outdoors, and it's lacking key features for a professional studio setting, then what is it best for? So my conclusion is, the G300 is perfectly designed for a solo filmmaker who travels a lot, shoots indoors, and just needs basic light features. It's for an indie filmmaker that needs a super powerful yet compact light to take on a plane or hop between locations without worrying much about space or weight, knowing that when they're back home, their light won't take much shelf space either. And that's where the MOLUS G300 really shines. I personally used it many times while traveling for shoots, and I managed to fit double the amount of lights for the same size compared to what I used to carry from the other lights. And this by itself makes this light the only solution we have for these kind of situations, and makes it so worth it despite all its drawbacks and quirks. With all that said, for me, the G300 has become my go-to light for all my travel shoots when size and portability matter the most. It easily replaced my Nanlite 150B that fits in a bigger case, yet delivers less than half the output from the G300. But I still hope that ZHIYUN would work on another improved Pro model that would have V-mount battery power, fan control, and better controller mount options. Hope you liked this episode. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.